This is Mitzi Goose, and we're here to tell you about the tool that every weaver needs to have, the electric rope cutter. So, what is an electric rope cutter? It's actually a heated device that will cut, and actually, when I say cut, it really means melts, synthetic materials. Many things are actually made of polyester, which would include Texsolve and certain ribbons, certain ropes, etc. These cutters do not cut cotton, linen, or other natural materials. Now, why would you want one? Number one, because it melts both ends of the cut at the same time, so it saves you a lot of time. Number two, there's no fraying because once you cut it, it is much less likely to fray than if you cut it with a scissors and then hold the end in a flame. The other thing is that there is no open flame as would happen if you used a lighter or a candle. And because there's no open flame and you're not going to hold it in the flame for a long time, you will also not get a ball of black crud on your Texsolve. It's fast, it's easy, and unfortunately, it does stink. I showed you three examples of these rope cutters that I saw on Amazon. And I really prefer kind of the desktop model. The reason for that is because I can hold both ends of the rope and push the rope down or the Texsolve down into the blade. If you use one of these handhelds, or you could try to use a soldering iron, but that will require that you hold it or that you create some sort of holder so that you can use both hands to control the two ends of whatever you're cutting. So that's why I prefer the desktop model. The handheld models or the soldering iron will work, but it just requires a little bit more juggling or more than one person or whatever. Now, when would I use an electric rope cutter? I use it to cut Texsolve. I also use it to cut mason's twine, polyester ribbon, and of course, webbing that's used for backpacks and that sort of thing. I use mine all the time, and I think it's well worth the price. Usually they're under $100. What else should I know about the electric rope cutters? When you cut synthetic materials, it's going to stink. And I mean a plastic stinky smell. So you definitely want to use them in a well ventilated area, open the window, etc., etc. Also be careful because if the blade touches your carpet, you're going to get a burn in the carpet. Those metal tabs with holes in it, that's used to mount it to a table or a larger piece of wood or whatever so that it doesn't just roll over. And so I will admit that I just use mine on my tile floor next to the window, but you do want to be careful with it because it's going to hurt if you touch that blade. When I turn mine on, I make sure I've got all my cutting ready to go. And the reason for that is because I don't want to be turning it off and then turning it back on, waiting for it to heat, do another cut, turn it off, etc., etc. And you don't want to leave that thing turned on because it stinks. It's usually burning off extra pieces of residual from the last time you used it. So even if you're not cutting, it's gonna smell. You also don't want to cut whatever you want to cut with a scissors first. Number one, it kind of ruins the efficiency of being able to do this all at once. Number two, if you cut it with your scissors, even if it's sharp scissors, you're likely to have it fray. And now you're trying to melt the fraying areas, and it's just going to be a nightmare. So if you're using synthetic materials, you're much better off just cutting it with the rope cutter. And once you practice, you'll get a feel for how fast you can actually cut it so that you don't cut it too fast or too slow. Because if you try to cut it too slow, all you're going to do is burn up lots more fumes, etc., and it's not going to seal it any better. If you try to cut it too fast, then it may not seal properly. So trust me, you get a feeling once you practice with it so that you know what the speed is. Now, I find it easiest to use both hands, like I'm showing you here, and let the cutter melt the product. So if you've got Texsolve, let it melt through the Texsolve. I find that when you lower it into the blade, this will be the easiest and the least smelly method. What if you end up with a fraying part? Well, what I'll do is I'll cut the extra ends off and then hold the Texol or whatever to the surface of the warm cutting blade. And usually that will melt it and seal it off. Sometimes I'll touch it multiple times just to make sure that it's all sealed. But there's a point at which it's sealed and holding it there any longer is just generating fumes, but it's not actually sealing anything. So again, you figure this out once you've used it multiple times.